Welcome to the Church and Family Life podcast. Church and Family Life exists to proclaim the sufficiency of Scripture. And today we get to hear a story about the power of the gospel from the lips of one of our preachers at our national conference, Toby Logsdon. Hey, Toby, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me with you. I'm blessed to be here with you.
Yeah, so Toby is a pastor at New Beginnings Church in Linwood, Washington, and I just learned that the building that he meets in is the oldest one-room schoolhouse in his county in Linwood, Washington, which is in the Seattle area. Anyway, it's so good to have Toby here to talk about all these things. So, Toby, as you know, what we want to do is have our preachers tell the story of their life and to explain how God captured them and all the things surrounding it, just so people can have a greater sense of who that preacher is who's preaching to them at the conference. So tell us the story of your life.
Well, thanks again for having me, you guys. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to share my testimony with you. It's not something that I necessarily talk about a lot, but like you said, this is something that will introduce people to me. It'll kind of tell you where I'm from and how I became who I am, how the Lord used certain circumstances in my life, painful circumstances sometimes, to mold me and shape me into who I am today. So I was raised in Las Vegas. I was actually born in Oregon, but my dad was getting his PhD in English, and he got hired at the community college in Las Vegas to teach English. And so when I was like 2.5 years old, we moved to Las Vegas, and that's where I grew up. This was in the 70s, of course, when it was still old Vegas. New Vegas is very different, but it used to be that the desert was literally, you go 2 streets behind our house and you were in the desert. Now it's a huge city, but grew up in a nice neighborhood. But in this neighborhood, one day a pastor came to my parents' door and invited them to his church. So we started going to church when I was fairly young. I think I was probably 6. It was an ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America church. If that tells you anything, if you know anything about the ELCA, it's very liberal with their beliefs, and they were back then as well. I was never real active in the church. It never meant a whole lot to me, never really connected with me. As I grew up, it wasn't central to my week or my life in any way. When I was still fairly young, I was abused by an older boy in our neighborhood. He was a cool guy. He had an old Mustang that he drove around. Seemed like a real nice guy. Ended up abusing me and at least one other boy in the neighborhood that I knew of, possibly others. And obviously, that's the kind of thing that really can affect a kid, and it really affected me. And I didn't say anything to anybody because his threat was, if you tell anybody, I'll just tell everybody, that it was your fault. And so I never told anybody, not for several years anyway. By the time I was 14, though, it was really sinking in, and I was becoming very angry. I was even suicidal. I attempted suicide at 14. I got into all kinds of trouble. That's all I can say without going into too much detail on long stories. But I was very angry. I started pulling away from all my friends that I'd grown up with, especially other guys. Had no interest in being friends with other guys. around that time, I also started listening to angry music, punk music, and that stuck with me throughout my teenage years. Listening to punk music, I even had spiked hair, and I did all kinds of crazy things with my hair. Thankfully, I don't have it anymore, so I don't even have that temptation.
Ironic.
But all of it was to kind of create this persona where nobody would want to be friends with me because I didn't want to be friends with anyone. But during those years, and this extended into my high school years, I was really just learning to be a non-conformist. When I first started listening to punk music, I was experimenting with alcohol and some light drugs, and I just decided I didn't want to have anything to do with that. So I even wasn't a conformist in the punk community. I stopped doing drinking and smoking and drugs kind of right off the bat. I just decided it wasn't for me. But during those years, I also became very active in soccer and in martial arts, and those are things that I was pretty good at. And so, being fairly good at soccer, I actually, our high school team won the state championship, and I had a couple schools that recruited me for soccer to play in college, and I decided to play at this small college affiliated with the ELCA. It was a very small liberal arts college in Southern California. Scott, you may know because it's not far from your stomping grounds. But that's where I was really introduced to things like Universalism. The head of the religion department at the time was a Universalist. There was a Marcionist there. In fact, if it's any indication, to this day, that school's still there. The head of the religion department today at this small Lutheran college is Muslim.
Wow.
So that kind of gives you an indication of their doctrine there. And so I just kind of accepted whatever they taught me because I figured, these are teachers and pastors. These guys know. And so I really had no interest in Christianity. Just wasn't anywhere on my radar. Wasn't anything that I felt like I needed. I felt like, I had been a pretty moral person by not smoking, not drinking, not doing drugs, for X number of years. But that was all swept out from under me. Eventually, when it was my junior year, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine at the time, invited me to church, and I would have said no, except it was an evangelical free church. And so I was thinking it was free of evangelicals. True story. I've been taught to think very negatively about evangelicals in at my college. So I went, but kind of reluctantly and, not expecting much. But when I heard the gospel, I realized that not smoking, not drinking, not doing drugs, that was basically, I had no ground to stand on before God. And that was when the Lord opened my ears to hear and to believe the gospel. It was at that church in Conejo Valley in Southern California. And so for about the next 2 years, I was really active in that church. If there was a Bible study, I'd go to the Bible study. If there was a men's thing going on, I'd go. If they were doing baptisms, I'd go. I was really active for 2 years, got to know the pastor really well. The questions that I had about, stuff that I'd been taught at my school, the pastor, he knew how to handle all those objections, all those questions. And so whenever I had something, I could go to him and, really got to know him well. He was really a rich blessing in my life. And when I got to graduation, I had planned on becoming a clinical psychologist after graduating. But the pastor at this church had encouraged me to at least pray about and consider going to seminary. So I applied for a few seminaries, one of them being Dallas Theological Seminary. And I was accepted for the fall semester of 1995, which was honestly way too soon for me to be going to seminary. And I'll get to that in a minute. But in the semester that I had between when I graduated and when I was going to be going to seminary, I met my wife. I actually met her on Valentine's Day, just accidentally.
Hey.
We were online. It was in an IRC chat room. It was a Christian debate room, and not that I thought anything of it, but that was the first time that I met her. Eventually, we started talking more and more. I asked her if I could call her. I called her. We started talking every night, sometimes until late into the night. Eventually, I said, "You know what? I gotta meet this girl because I'm really falling for her. I really have strong feelings for her." And she was living in Colorado. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. I flew out there. I actually proposed within 24 hours of meeting
Whoa.
her. And she accepted. Who's the crazy one here, right?
We'll call it a draw.
We'll call it a draw. So she accepted, despite both of our parents having some concerns, but we decided to get married that December 30th that year, between the fall and spring semesters while I would be at Dallas Seminary. During the spring semester, after we got married, during the spring semester at Dallas, I started encountering some textual criticism again, and it was much harder material than I had encountered in college. And I had no idea how to respond to those things. And I didn't have a pastor like the pastor that I'd had in Southern California who could help walk me through, the solution, the answers. And so that really shook my faith. But also at that time, it was my wife's first time living anywhere but Colorado. So she was kind of homesick. So between everything, I just decided to drop out. I figured it just wasn't for me. So I dropped out of seminary after 1 year at Dallas, and we moved to Colorado, where my wife was from. I ended up being trained and working as a stockbroker there, which was interesting. But within probably a year and a half, 2 years, my wife's parents got divorced, and it was painful and it was messy. They'd been married for 24 years, 25 years, and Christina just wanted to leave because it was so messy, and she didn't want to be stuck between kind of a tug of war. So she asked if we could move to Las Vegas, where my parents still lived, and where they would have a grandpa and grandma who were still married, for our kids to know as they were growing up. We had a son at that point. So we moved to Las Vegas in 1998. I decided when we moved that I didn't want to be a stockbroker anymore. Aside from the fact that I hated working 12 and 14-hour days and talking with people on the phone in very uncomfortable situations, I was just a terrible salesman. So just to be honest, I couldn't sell anything. I couldn't sell a heater to an Eskimo, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what career path to pursue. And so my college roommate came into town at one point, and we started talking, and he said, "Hey, why don't you get into the casino industry while you figure out what your next step is?" And that seemed like an okay plan to me. The city is full of casinos. So I became a table games dealer in Las Vegas. Soon after we had moved to Las Vegas, we had started attending a church. It was a church plant that was extremely seeker sensitive. And we became members there. My parents also became members there. And there was one Sunday where the sermon that the pastor preached was so bad. He twisted scripture so badly that we all just decided to leave. It was just that bad. We left, my wife and I left, and my parents also left. Well, we never heard anything from that church again, but my parents had the pastor show up at their house, and he was calling them day and night, begging them not to leave because, as he told them, they were his biggest givers.
Wow.
And man, I felt so burned. I felt so offended, and I just thought, if this is what Christianity is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Right. So between not knowing how to deal with all that textual criticism stuff, the liberal theology, and then what I was being taught elsewhere, and then feeling really burned by this church, just all these factors, I stopped going to church on a regular basis for about 5 years. Having left the church, I was also under the impression that God was done with me. And as I considered my life, I felt like, this was all just leading to this moment where God would not have me back. And that was really based on my misunderstanding of a passage in Hebrews chapter 6. But my misunderstanding of that passage just crushed my heart, crushed my soul for those 5 years. At some point, after about 5 years, I did come across an explanation of those verses somewhere online that made a lot more sense than, that you can lose your salvation and that, God will just wash his hands of you if you walk away from the church for a season. But soon after I came across this explanation that actually made sense of that passage, my wife, who had been still going to church faithfully all those years, she found some apologetics books that helped me deal with textual criticism, some of the Lee Strobel stuff, Norman Geisler stuff. And so I finally had answers to a lot of the textual criticism questions that I'd had for so long. Going back to 1996 when I was confronted with those ideas in seminary and just didn't know what to do with it. So I started going back to church, and I was just suddenly really on fire for the Lord, knowing that he did love me, knowing that he was calling me back after all those years, and still feeling like there was a calling on my life. I decided that I would at least reapply for seminary.
You're still dealing blackjack in the casinos?
Yeah. Blackjack and dice. And
how'd that go on your application for seminary?
Exactly. I actually told them, told my wife, told the seminary when I got there. I said I figured I had no chance of being accepted, so I had nothing to lose by applying. But I actually got accepted at Norman Geisler Seminary, Southern Evangelical Seminary, which is in Matthews, North Carolina. And there I could study under Norman Geisler. I could learn how to address not only the textual criticism, but the liberal theology that had shaken my faith for so many years. So in 2004, that was right around when the housing market was really bubbling up. We were able to sell our house for enough money that I could go to seminary for a few years, and we'd be able to not only buy a house, but we were able to afford to live for a few years.
Wow.
Although I did work part-time at a bank while I was in seminary. but yeah, I didn't make a lot of money. But so we moved to North Carolina, where I earned my Master's of Divinity. When we were getting close to graduating, or when I was getting close to graduating, a friend and I started talking, and we got in touch with a pastor in Little Rock, Arkansas, who wanted to plant a church up in the Fayetteville, Arkansas area. So we moved to Arkansas with my seminary friend and his wife and his family in 2008 with the plan of planting a church, being sent by this church in Little Rock. Well, about a year into planting this church in Fayetteville, we found out that the elders at our sending church in Little Rock, they denied inerrancy, and they had some really liberal views of Scripture. And just because of my background, it just wasn't going to work for me. And it wasn't going to work for my seminary friend either. He studied apologetics as well, and had some real problems with the theology that we were hearing from this church in Little Rock. So we wrote a letter to that church to express our concerns. They ended up telling us, we're severing ties, and so I ended up being in Northwest Arkansas without, as a church planter, without a sending church. I think it was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 months later, there was a church in Northwest Arkansas. We had become good friends with the pastoral staff there, and they agreed to work with us to plant the church in the area. So we got back to work with that. Probably a year later, we had about 40 people who were attending our biweekly evening services, and so in my opinion, 40 people is a pretty decent following. There are weeks when we haven't had 40 people here. When I first got here, there were weeks when we had 6 people here. So we had 40 people who were attending our biweekly evening services. So I thought, that's probably enough to just start the church. So I sat down with my friend and his wife to suggest, that we consider start meeting on Sunday morning every week for services. And he looked at his wife and kind of laughed, and they said, "We're too busy." And I thought, what? I'd been there for a couple of years at that point. We moved there with the sole intention of planting a church. And my seminary friend, he was a good guy, but I think he was just being pulled in a lot of different directions. Not long after we had moved there, he started teaching in the public school system there. And that was a 70 or 80 hour a week job. Teachers have long schedules during the week. And so he was busy. And that made it apparent to me that the Lord might be leading me somewhere else, that there might be another opportunity or another place that the Lord would have me serve. It just seemed like we were hitting one obstacle after another. And so after a lot of prayer, I had committed to 3 years of planting this church in Northwest Arkansas, and that time was coming up in the next few months. And so I told my friend that I was going to, just prayerfully explore my options. And I found an ad on a church employment website for, that was looking for a pastor in the Seattle area. And I sent them my resume. One of the elders here started listening to my sermons on BibleStudyPodcasts.org, which was a podcasting ministry that I had started when I was in seminary, with the idea that because my seminary didn't teach me how to preach, I needed to learn how to preach. And so, I started BibleStudyPodcasts.org. The seminary I went to actually only had a 1-week class in preaching, which did not give me any confidence at all that I was ready to preach. So one of the elders here started listening to my sermons on BibleStudyPodcasts.org, and after he heard me, he urged me to pursue employment here, to prayerfully consider coming here, to come up here and preach as a candidate for the church. And so I came up here in December of 2010 to preach as a candidate. And the following week, the church voted unanimously to call me as their pastor, and we accepted. And so we moved here in early 2011. I came here for only $700 a month. If you know the Seattle area, it is
That's a rough program, boy.
really, yeah, it's a rough place to have a ministry, and it's very expensive here. I came here for $700 a month, knowing that this church was kind of on its last leg, and that might be exaggerating on the generous side. This church was somewhere between being on life support and being dead. But we felt like this was. We prayed about it, and we felt like this was where the Lord would have us. We had some friends in Washington, in the Seattle area, so we thought, we actually know some people there. Let's go ahead and go for it. Even for $700 a month, it didn't matter. But God has blessed and sustained our ministry here. There were weeks, there were months when we first got here when they said, "Don't cash your paycheck until Thursday." That's when the funds will be ready for you. But, over the years, God has blessed this church. He has sustained our ministry. And now I've been here at this church for just over 12 years now.
Wow.
Looking back on my testimony after 12 years of pastoring here, I'd actually say that there were two very painful things from my childhood and early adult years that have actually served me very well as a pastor. The abuse that I suffered that made me a non-conformist in my teenage years. Being a non-conformist has served me really well as a pastor. In an age where there's so much pragmatism and the church is just, it's being torn apart by basically being conformed to the ways of the world.
Right.
I am perfectly comfortable to this day. I am perfectly comfortable swimming against, the flow, even if that means going alone. If I've got a conviction on something that, and I think the American church is mistaken on, I'll take it to my elders. I trust them. I've got some pastor friends that I trust, who are solid. But I'm very comfortable being a nonconformist. And I think in this day and age, that serves a lot of pastors well. Funny thing, I've actually gotten to know a few pastors, solid guys, Reformed Baptists, on Twitter, who also grew up listening to punk music and being nonconformists. You would never guess that God would use that for a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's pretty niche.
Yeah, but he definitely has. Now, that doesn't mean I would encourage anybody to get into punk music, but I'm just saying. And the other thing is, in the casino industry, not only did I develop, and as a stockbroker, right, not only did I develop a very unique perspective on the futility of worldly riches and worldly treasure, but the casino industry also demands an extremely strong work ethic because you burn out in that industry right away. Everybody does. And so it taught me how to push through when I feel like I've hit a wall. And that was something that I didn't have when I came into the casino industry. And that comes in really helpful, on weeks when I'm tired, when I'm being pulled all kinds of different directions, and I just feel like I don't have the energy to put in all the work for a sermon that week. So it helps having co-elders who can step in. Obviously, that's always good, having a co-elder who can preach from time to time. but there's just no substitute for a good, strong, diligent work ethic that knows how to push through. When you're wanting to take a break and you have a lot of work left to do.
Yeah.
So the Lord has actually used those things to strengthen me and perhaps prepare me for pastoral ministry.
Isn't that wonderful? God, He uses all things in our lives to work together for good. So, wow, what a
Amen.
story. What a story. From a blackjack table to a pulpit. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if there are many pastors out there who can say that they've traveled that road.
You're the first that I've ever met.
Yeah.
I have met former punkers, but not blackjack dealers.
Yep. No, actually, the last year, the final year that I was a dealer, I was working at the Aladdin at the time. It's now Planet Hollywood, and it got bought out in the last year that I was there. But let me tell you, once I caught fire for the Lord again, I was evangelizing from the blackjack tables. You would be amazed how open people are to talking about the Lord while they go and throw their money away. But I that's another thing that the Lord used my casino experience for is evangelism. I really love evangelism. I have a heart for evangelism. Our church actually has a team of street preachers that we send out into the streets to preach outside of football games and baseball games and all those types of things. So evangelism is very important to me. Always has been.
Praise the Lord. Toby, thank you so much. It was really neat to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
God bless you, and can't wait to see you at the conference.
Likewise. I look forward to being there.
Good deal. Okay. Well, Jason, there goes another one.
There's another.
Pretty neat. And thank you for joining us on the Church and Family Life podcast. Church and Family Life exists to proclaim the sufficiency of Scripture. What a sufficient God who uses all things for His own glory. Hope to see you next time, and hope to see you at our conference, May 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Come to the Singles Conference, which is a pre-conference, and then the main conference, May 4th at Ridgecrest. See you there. Thanks for listening to the Church and Family Life podcast. We have thousands of resources on our website, announcements of conferences coming up. Hope you can join us. Go to churchandfamilylife.com. See you next Monday for our next broadcast of the Church and Family Life podcast.